This is Comic Shenanigans, episode 1112, creator commentary on FELA, Music is the Weapon.
Ain't no stopping them shenanigans. Love getting into shenanigans. All up in them shenanigans. 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 Shenanigans.
Welcome to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. I'm your host, Adam Chapman. This is episode 1112. This is a creator commentary on FELA, Music is the Weapon. This is a fantastic new original graphic novel, which, it's funny. I think these days we're used to original graphic novels maybe not being quite as lengthy and substantial as this one. This is well over 300 pages. This is written by Conor McCreery, who's previously been on the show, and it's illustrated by JIBOLA FAGBAMIYE. I think I massacred that, but I tried my best. They were generous enough to sit down with me over Microsoft Teams to chat about working on this amazing project. The last time we had Conor on the show, for those who remember, he does not live in Canada right now. He's living in Europe, and so I think it was late in the evening for him, but for us it was a nice afternoon chat with me and JIBOLA, and this was a lot of fun. FELA, Music is the Weapon is the new original graphic novel, as I said, that is coming out on Tuesday, and it is just tremendous. I didn't know anything about FELA. So for those who know about FELA, I'm a neophyte. I am a newcomer to the game. I don't know anything about FELA until I read this book. And I was exposed to some phenomenal music and this amazing tale of this real-life person from Nigeria. So this was really something. And I really have to thank JIBOLA and Conor for, kind of bringing us on this adventure. It was really fantastic. And so in this conversation, we kind of get into the weeds on where the initial concept of this came from, how Conor became involved, what the collaboration was like between them, and certain ins and outs of working on the project. I don't think we really get into any spoilers, so to speak, but we do get kind of in depth on some of the decisions that were made, and the idea of you're doing a story based on real people. When do you use composites? When do you not? When do you use real people? And how accurate do you try to be for what they were? So a lot of really cool stuff in here. I think you're really going to enjoy it. I think I'm going to interject to myself in a moment. Me from the future is about to tell you about something that I don't have the information right at hand at the moment when I'm recording this, and then we will throw to the episode. Thanks, Adam from the past. The thing I wanted to mention is something that Conor wanted to mention. Since this episode is going up on the 4th of October, coming up on Thursday, October 16th, there is going to be an event called FELA Lives in Toronto, which is where both creators are from. It's going to be at 1213 Bathurst Street, which is the Space Unlimited is the name of the event. Name of the place where the event is. It's got a $10 entrance fee. And then if you buy the book, there's a $10 discount, I think, if you purchase the book. But anyways, it's a book launch party for this. It's going to be 7 to 11 on Thursday, October 16th. So you should definitely check that out if you're in the Toronto area, to be able to enjoy some FELA music and get to meet JIBOLA and Conor and celebrate this fantastic new book and get your hands on it. It's well worth reading if you haven't already pre-ordered it and haven't already read it at the time of the book launch. They just want to see people come out and be able to celebrate both the book and Afrobeat and what FELA brought to the world. So again, you should definitely do so. And thanks again for listening to this episode. You can email me at comicshenanigans@gmail.com. Rate the show on Apple Podcasts, listen to us on Apple Podcasts, and also listen to us on Spotify. Upcoming episodes, we're going to have a Creator Spotlight episode coming up next week. I think we're talking about Joe Madureira, which is kind of a big one for me and Nate. So although I picked some weird stuff, so it won't be the hits. We're going to be talking some other stuff, which I think is interesting. Although one could, is kind of called a hit. I'm maybe not being fair. I think one of them I kind of put on the list as kind of a gimme was one that would entice us more and interest us more. But it would be really interesting to kind of chart out a little bit of his own history as an artist. So that'll be our next Creator Spotlight episode. And then in a couple of weeks, we're going to have, after that, going to have a new episode with Ron Friends doing a creator commentary as we continue the run on Thor epics. So just reading the next one, I think it was Immortal Flesh, is the epic we're going to be talking about this time, since we were going to talk about it last time, but we got waylaid. I let us get waylaid talking very in depth about his most recent story in Fantastic Four Fanfare number 3, and I think it was well worth the diversion, that's for sure. And then after that, we're going to have a Book of the Month Club, maybe a return to... No, this is going to be the baseball one. We're going to do a baseball-themed Book of the Month Club where we're going to be talking about some specific comics that feature baseball, not just the X-Men playing baseball, but actually taking place at a baseball stadium in some way, and the baseball is part of the plot. So I'm really excited about doing that. And then we're going to have a new episode with Chuck Austin and Pat Olive doing a creator commentary on The Call, the first book they collaborated on back in the early 2000s. This was requested by a listener. It was supposed to come out a little earlier. We had a scheduling snafu, so it did have to get pushed back a little bit so that we could make sure that Chuck had a chance to fully read the material, even though it's his own. As anyone who's listened to the most recent episode that he did with the Metropolis creator commentary, just because he wrote it 20 years ago doesn't mean he remembers everything about it. And so when he's able to really go back through it, it really can mean something more. And it's just really interesting to be able to see him go through that. So I do want to thank Nick, or Nicholas Baldwin, for suggesting that, because I think he was like, well, would you be up, would it ever be possible to do a creator commentary? And so I kind of messaged Chuck, and I'm like, so we're doing creator commentary on The Call? And he's like, yeah, Pat's up for it. So that'll be coming up soon. So anyways, with all, this is a lot of preamble. Let's jump right into the conversation with Conor and JIBOLA. This was such a fantastic conversation. And again, you should really pick up FELA, Music is the Weapon. Enjoy. Welcome back, Conor, and welcome, JIBOLA, to the Comic Shenanigans podcast. How are you guys today?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very excited to have you on the show. Conor's obviously a repeating guest, but you are not. So if you can let us know a little bit about your backstory. I mean, obviously you're an artist on this amazing new book that we're going to talk about, but what is your kind of entry into graphic novels, into illustration? What's your background?
Sure. My name is JIBOLA. I'm a Nigerian artist based in Toronto. I've been in Toronto for over 20 years now, but I grew up in Nigeria, and I've been an artist my whole life. I've been illustrating and drawing like any chance I get. And in high school, I would draw comics and just give it out. And I think the first comic I did was this Rambo-inspired comic called Panther Assault. Conor, I actually have a copy at home, so if you want one, I can give it to you.
I've never. This is literally the first time I'm ever hearing about this book.
Yeah. So there's that book. Panther Assault.
That's my Rambo impression.
And then after that, the next comic I worked on was an independent project called Dante, Last Son of the Apocalypse, and which was about 44 pages long. But then I had always been inspired by FELA because I grew up in Nigeria. FELA is a legend in Nigeria. For those who don't know who Fela Kuti is, FELA is a Nigerian musician that created this genre of Afrobeat. Genre of music called Afrobeat, and that's one of the things he did. He also ran for president of Nigeria, got arrested over 200 times, released over 55 albums, married 27 women in one day, and also created his own country, right? And I was obviously really fascinated about this story. I'll compress the story a bit here. I met Conor and I told him about this project, and we decided to work on it together, and here we are.
So I'm really curious about this because this is, first of all, it's a really tremendous story, and even just hearing you kind of summarize it very briefly and then seeing how your art brings it to life, I'm curious about, I'm going to kind of pivot a bit to Conor here, but it's such an interesting voice to it, and obviously that comes through with your artwork. So, what was the collaboration between you, both of you, to establish the voice? Because it's very specific to this, this almost mythic character, this real person. But Conor, you have to kind of get into the headspace of how to write this person. So, you're very curious what your collaboration was like, so that you can make sure that the voice felt authentic, and that. Also, how early in the process did you decide to kind of make it him telling the story and being a more first person?
That's a good question. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, JIBOLA.
Oh, okay. So I had already started writing the graphic novel before I met Conor. So I started working on it around 2009, 2010. I had watched this play called FELA on Broadway that was beautifully done, and it gave me this passion to want to do this project. And I had also read this book called This Bitch of the Life by Carlos Moore that also talks about that also features Fela. It's about Fela's life, and the cadence and the way Fela speaks was the first time I had ever paid attention to it, and I was like, that is interesting. He speaks in a very specific way. And then I had watched a bunch of interviews. So when I saw that play, I thought to myself, I could totally write a better story than this, right? Even though it was amazing, I thought I could do a better job. But I quickly realized that I was not the best writer. So that's when I reached out to Conor, and we started to, I showed him some of my research. But Conor already knew about Fela as well, and we started to collaborate on how best to establish the voice and the tone of the graphic novel. So Conor, I'll let you talk a little bit more about that.
I think that kind of summarizes it all, right? There's a lot of primary research out there on Fela. There's documentaries. There's a book called This Bitch of a Life where a lot of Fela is in the first person being reported. There's a lot of newspaper clippings. Fela gave a lot of speeches. And of course, there's his music, and there's his interact with his audience and talk about what he felt and what his songs meant. And so really it was just absorbing all of that, and then just kind of, figuring out his rhythm. In some ways it kind of felt like being a bit of an actor, right? It's like, how do I impersonate, this character? And I had, when I was younger, I had a bit of an acting background. And so that was, I think in many ways it was just like, I'm just going to become this character. And often, when I write, I will read out a scene after I've said it. I perform it. And, it's like when I perform it, then I'm like, okay, does it hit or does it not hit? Right? If it's hard to perform, there's probably something wrong with it. And so, it was fun. It's fun to get into his voice and to be like, oh, this is how Fela would say this. And I'd like to think that there are probably parts of the book where it would be really hard, even for like a hardcore Fela head, to be able to be like, oh, he said that, but that's something that they've made up based on, ideas of Fela. So I hopefully that would be the case. I think that'd be a good challenge. Is like, oh, did Fela, is this a direct quote or is this like from the book? But who knows?
So, JIBOLA, I have a question for you in terms of the art. Obviously, when you're telling a story about someone who the music was so much the expression of who they were, but you don't have access to that. Like, you can't use that in. Hopefully, someone puts on Fela's music when they're reading the story, but you don't have that necessarily woven in. So you have to figure out a way with your art to convey the message and the feeling, and use colors to express what the music is really kind of doing. And you kind of show the progression of his music and how he approaches it with your art and with the colors. So I'm curious about what you can kind of say about how you really kind of dove into that. And did you play his music in the background when you're drawing? And did you have, when you're doing segments of his life that was earlier, are you playing that earlier music to try and get the vibe? I'm just curious about how you established that visual tone and how you use the colors to express that more.
Sure, that's a good question. There were a couple of graphic novels that inspired me. I think a big one was Coach Henderson's Ink. And one of the things that he did in that graphic novel was that the art style changed when JFK was killed, right? So the color palette looked one way, and then this dramatic event happened, and the art style changed to something else. And when I saw that, I was like, that's very interesting. I wonder if we're going to do a FELA story that also feels like a FELA song that evolves over time and, you know, carries you almost like an experience. We could sort of borrow that idea where the art evolves over time as well and evolves with the story. So we start off with this mythical, magical world of Yoruba mythology, and we introduce the audience to this idea called Abiku, which is children who die to be reborn. Who die to be? My English, you know. So we introduce you to that, and then when you get into the meat of the story, you get the art style feels a little bit more familiar, your typical graphic novel style with 6 to 8 panels, depending on what we're trying to say. And then we had this scene where a really dramatic thing happened, and the art style also changes dramatically. It becomes darker, more baroque, more desaturated, and as the story went on, it became rougher and more claustrophobic. And the idea was to make the user feel like the character is also feeling, right? You know, so we're just trying to achieve that so that it feels like you're reading something different, but also feels like an experience. And I would listen to FELA's songs. You're right. I would listen to him all the time, and it sort of helped me meditate and think about it, right? And there are certain scenes that whenever I would struggle with the vibe I was trying to go with, I would listen to the song. Like a good one is Unknown Soldier. There's a scene in the book that is basically like Unknown Soldier. So listening to it and trying to match the vibe of the song was just very helpful. And there's one last thing I should mention. When I reached out to Conor to work on this project, I was thinking it was going to be maybe 80 to 100 pages, right? And Conor went to do his magic and came back with 350 pages. And I was thinking to myself, I'm not writing 350 pages. And I was on a mission to cut it in half. But I would read it and go like, man, these are so good. But there were these pages that there were no dialogue. That was just dance, right? Or the scene where we introduced FELA's drama, Tony Allen, that was just drumming. And at first I was like, no, we're cutting this. It should be 3 panels or whatever. But then when I started to draw it, it started to feel like, oh, this should even be more than what we had there. And talking to people who are read it, who are musicians, they really connected with those scenes that were just, you're just taking in the art and taking in the music of it.
It does feel like you do let a lot of these scenes have time to breathe, as you said. Like, you can kind of get to marinate in it, and you're not just kind of streaming past these moments, which I do appreciate. A question about general sense of pacing. When you have certain chapter breaks, they do feel like, closing the page on an individual issue of a comic. So was that ever a consideration to kind of maybe serialize this and put it into, kind of floppies, for lack of a better term, or individual issues? Or was it always kind of designed that, no, it needs to be kind of one big thing, we're just going to have these very deliberate chapter breaks?
Do you want to take that one, or?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
No. when we sold the book to Amistad, they wanted a graphic novel, and so HarperCollins doesn't really do floppies. It's not something they're familiar with. It's actually only Amistad's, which is the label, for lack of a better term, the imprint that we're on. It's only the second graphic novel they've ever done. So, I don't think it was ever in their mindset. But you still, whether it's going to be every 22 pages or not, you still really want to have that structure of, you always want the turn page to be asking a question, and you do want to have some sort of cliffhanger. It'd be interesting to go through this book now and kind of count where those more significant cliffhangers are to see. Again, I don't think they're every 22, but they're probably relatively evenly spaced, because I think that's just when you write. I've written comics and graphic novels for quite a while now, and you get into that natural rhythm of being okay, now it's time to ask a big question. Even though every page needs to end with some sort of question, you need to have those big questions that really it's maybe, especially with graphic novels, maybe this is the best time I'm going to put the book down now, because it's clear we're about to move into another situation. Okay, I'm going to put it down, I'm going to do something else, and I'm going to come back to it knowing where I am, because I want to know, is Sandra going to come visit him in Nigeria, or is that romance been destroyed? And Sandra, just for context, the person who kind of helped FELA become political was this American woman, Sandra Isidore, who was a member of the Black Panthers, and she was really influential on FELA in terms of introducing him to Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Stokely Carmichael and all these Black thought leaders, and it really changed FELA's point of view. He had originally kind of believed that Nigeria and Africa were kind of at fault for their own problems. Hey, the Brits and the French and the Belgians, they've all been gone for 15, 20 years. Why don't we have our shit together? And she really made him interrogate that belief and be wait a second, the legacy of colonialism, the hell of it is how much of it is hidden, right? It's like an iceberg. There's a little bit on top. You're okay, well, yeah, clearly they controlled where we went, and then there's just all this stuff under the water that you don't even realize, that how you think, how your legal system was designed, how you communicate was all kind of dictated to you by this foreign culture. And it's not that those things are necessarily in and of themselves wrong, but it's not how your culture would work if it was given its opportunity. And that, of course, creates tension and problems when people are kind of forced to do something that may not really be the natural way that they would choose to organize themselves. So that's the kind of how that all rolled together, I suppose.
When you approach writing FELA, how much of it was trying to, again, capture that lyrical quality, not just in the songs themselves, but just of himself? That kind of natural cadence, as you said. Obviously, you have a lot of archival footage you can look at, but how do you really tap into that voice? And I guess you kind of answered part of it, that you do read it aloud. You do kind of want to understand the voice and this character that you're portraying. How much did it take time to kind of be able to dial into that? And how many kind of failed attempts at kind of capturing that voice do you think you kind of had before you felt like you kind of nailed that voice?
It didn't really take too long, because there was such a long period of doing the research, and JIBOLA had given me all this material, and then I went away and I probably had 100 index cards of quotes I liked, scene ideas, important factual things. And so, and we were communicating back and forth and sending emails. So I think I was kind of immersed in FELA's voice for quite a while before I actually started quote unquote putting pen to paper. And so by the time I was actually putting it in, I think I felt I had a pretty good handle on the voice. And one of the ways I write, what I normally like to do, is whatever I wrote the last week or so, that's how I start writing. So I reread everything I've done over the last week or so, and I'm editing it, I'm tightening it. And so that process gets me reading and gets me into the cadence. And so by the time I'm ready to start the new page, the 10, 15 pages I'm going to try to knock off in that day, I'm in that mental space, and I'm in the rhythm. So yeah, it was, and also FELA's got a really distinctive rhythm, right? He really does. It's it's like doing a broad accent, a broad Scottish accent or whatever. And you're just oh yeah, it is this broad and very easy to slip into personality because it's a big personality and it's very well defined.
When you're
just to
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to add to that, just from the artistic point of view. I think the challenge on my side was just trying to get the aura or the spirit of FELA, but I had spent years just perfecting how to draw FELA's face, with different expressions, laughing, angry, just all of that. But initially when I first started, it felt really stiff. And it was almost like it was just portrait drawings, because I mostly draw for my painting practice. I'm more of a portrait artist. So you would have these shots that are pretty straight on, just like side on, right? And I remember Conor just giving his experience was like, hey man, they're too static, right? Is there a way to sort of make it a bit more fluid? And I remember just kind of stopping and just going through so many different materials, not just reading different graphic novels, but also just watching FELA from different angles, and not so much, I want to get his expression correctly. It was just like, how does he move? How does he stand? How does he raise his fist up, right? And it's all those movements, the way he dresses is really, really curated and really distinct. And wanted to make sure we got it right. So if a FELA fan is reading it, they feel like, these guys actually thought it through. They thought about all these little nuances. And if you're new to FELA, you're thinking, okay, this is a new character that's very distinct. It adds to what you're learning as well.
For sure. And I would say, I guess I'm one of those new to FELA people, so I can say that, it definitely felt the world that he inhabited and the way that he perceived it felt very lived in. And so very much felt like you built that world both artistically and also in the writing, in terms of making it understandable, to understand what the circumstances that he's kind of working through. And so I wanted to ask about the idea, Conor mentioned, using his theater background to kind of capture the voice, because he's, portraying this character. And as you said, you're doing the same thing, but you're doing it artistically. So you're in control of this character's acting. So everything that's happening in terms of both subtext and text, you have to find a way to convey it on both the visual language, both of FELA and all the other assorted people in his life. So I'm curious, how many model sheets did you have going to kind of, as you said, kind of figure out all the different angles, not just for FELA, but all these other characters that are playing a big part in his life, and starting to figure out how to do the more physical character work and storytelling, so that, as you said, they're not stiff and they're coming more to life. And was it just FELA that felt more stiff because he was a very specific historical figure, and the other characters that were easier to move with? I'm just curious how you developed and established your sense of storytelling and acting for these characters.
I'd say that the first thing that I did was just mapping out all the different characters, all the main characters anyway. Mm-hmm. And the challenge I was having, maybe I shouldn't call it a challenge, but one of the things I had to work out was we had characters that we're going to change throughout the story, right? Because we're going to start at a really early part of their life when they were in their teens or 20s, and all the way to when they were older, right? And they should feel like the same person, but they've changed, right? But the world around them should also feel like it's changing, right? And like you said earlier, it felt lived in. So I had mapped out the different characters and what they would look like, and what the fashion was like, what the architecture was like at the time, right? To just make it feel a little bit more real. Again, just given the limitations of graphic novel, because we are using still images to tell moving, living, breathing characters. I wanted to make sure that the movement was there, even though in real life it's objectively not there. So the big thing I did was just mapping out all the characters and drawing them over and over again before just like putting them into the scenes, right? So it's like you are casting somebody to as FELA, and then you get them to dress in different costumes and different scenes, and then before you actually put them into the movie. That was kind of like the way I thought about it.
So building on that, one of the intricacies I thought was really well handled was that, with FELA, with the drug use, etc., like you have a lot of very, very small but very impactful visual stylings on the character to show that he is kind of ravaged by this. Like things are going on. You have him at one point like getting exceptionally skinny, and you have another character actually remarking on it like, you need to eat something, like something's going on. And so there's a lot of these really small physical touches to the character that really convey what's kind of going on without you having to necessarily put a beat on it. So we see that there's a lot of drug use and this other stuff, and that he's using this to achieve a different level of being. And so he thinks of it as one way, but we're seeing the physical ramifications of that in your art. But again, you're not hanging a hat on it, but you're doing it very subtly, but you can see how the character changes over time. And how much work was that for you to kind of add in those little touches so that you're conveying something very subtly as we go through the story, page after page. We see this kind of degradation of physical self, but you're not doing it in such an abrupt way. So I'm curious how it was for you to make sure that you were doing it, but also do it very subtly so that you'd still capture, almost adding another level to the story.
Yeah, in real life, that's what would happen, right? If you have a friend, a loved one, you've seen the 360 version of them, but this is something that's happening to them, but it's not necessarily defining them, right? So there are other things that is also happening in their life, right? So when you're experiencing FELA in the story, you've gone through this journey with him, right? And that's what it should feel like, that you met this guy and he's really cool, and you decide to hang out with him throughout this journey, and you start to see him change, and at some point you're like, I can't continue going on this journey with you. And then honestly, shout out to Conor for doing an amazing job writing this. And we would have these sessions where we would discuss and talk about how we want the reader to feel as they're going through the book. And for these very specific scenes, we wanted to make sure that it's not so much that we're focusing on it per se, but just like telling you as a matter of fact, but all these other things are going on as well. So you're not, it just helps us tell a richer story. And it's also given us a way to give you a different view about Nigeria and about Africa, right? Because most people don't know much about Nigeria, about West Africa, and by extension Africa, right? And we tell the story of FELA, but you seen Nigeria from his eyes, right? So that also adds to the point where you're not focusing on this particular thing happening to FELA. You're also focusing on, oh wow, like there was FELA who built this hospital, this clinic by his communes so people could get free healthcare. Oh, this particular event was happening in Nigeria. You're experiencing new food, right? Well, this other thing is happening to FELA, right? So that was kind of like the way we sort of constructed that. But I'm sure Conor will have a lot to say about that too.
I mean, honestly, no. I think JIBOLA really handled it I would just be flapping my gums at that point.
So, JIBOLA, I guess a question I have is, you talk about, again, we talked about this lived in space and kind of seeing a history of Nigeria at a very specific time through FELA's eyes. So how much reference material from both from your own life and also just of the time were you going through to make sure that it felt like Nigeria, like it felt like something that would be very again, as someone from Nigeria, it's probably easier for you to do that, but I'm just in general, how much work was it to make sure that it felt very familiar to you and to someone who would know about FELA, but also that new readers would be like, this is their first maybe time knowing anything about Nigeria, so being able to really expand more upon that.
When I grew up in Nigeria, I was in military school for a little bit, right? And when I went into university, I was literally in one of the worst schools in the country, right? And whenever I would tell stories of things that happened in the school to people in Canada, they would go like, really? That happened, right? And the stories that come out from Nigeria, and when you talk to Nigerians, are really uniquely Nigerian, right? So it was really important to put those stories in there, right? For people who are new to experiencing Nigeria, and for Nigerians who are like, oh yeah, I know that story. That's something that would totally happen, right? So I think there were scenes in the book. There were literally things that actually happened to me. And we just sort of wove in, and there were things that it's uniquely FELA that we wove in there. And again, if you're a FELA head, you would laugh at it because you know that story, and if you're new to it, you're like, I can't believe you did that. Like that's crazy, right? But it's and making sure that again that they are sort of complements it as well, that it doesn't sort of wash it away. Like, Conor had done such a good job, like constructing the story a certain way, just based on the conversation we've had. But, I felt an immense amount of responsibility because I wanted to do the story justice, and I wanted to make sure that what Conor came up with, that it popped with the drawings,
So Conor, I have a question for you now. I'll put you in the hot seat for a moment. So I'm curious about, like, obviously, JIBOLA already had an idea of what he wanted to do, but in terms of kind of ironing out sequencing, and so obviously you have a sense of what happened in this person's life, but also you have it from his own perspective, so it allows you to play with things in a different way. So for example, like when Sandra goes to meet him and then finds out he's already married, that's not information that we as a reader knew. We were being exposed to it at the same time, even though obviously chronologically it had already occurred. So I'm curious how many of those types of decisions you needed to make about how to kind of keep a narrative flow, and also kind of picking things that may have happened earlier, but figuring out a way to integrate them or discuss them later because of how you wanted the overall flow of the story to go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that's honestly, that's like, I guess the biggest piece, that's the biggest bit of the art of coming up with a story, right? Is exactly what you're talking about, is how do you take someone's life and remain faithful and true to the reality of the life, and still, though, structure it in a way that makes sense as a story. So Sandra's a great example who you just brought up. In real life, Sandra went to Nigeria 2 separate times, and she had a lot of the experiences in the book happened in very different times for her. But in the context of like trying to create a book, you're like, well, it could be a little confusing is not the right word, because like people could understand that she came to Nigeria twice. That's not exactly like a rocket science level type of question. But in terms of like how it would flow, it would kind of be like, oh, she was here, then she was gone, then she came back. And as a storyteller, you've got to try to come up with the reason that she's come back and why the audience understands that this is important. And so, ultimately you're like, oh, it's easier if this is one visit. And that way everything can occur in this one visit. And it's all accurate to the experiences that Sandra had, at least from what Sandra's written in her own book. And, what other people kind of said about Sandra's experiences in Nigeria. But it's not accurate in terms of this is actually the way the chronology worked. Another good example of that would be in FELA's lifetime, there was like 5 separate military governments. And FELA FELA had conflict with all of them in one way or in another. But that also gets confusing. It's like, okay, so there's this Nigerian, there's this military government, and here's General X. And he's overthrown, there's a coup, and then there's briefly a civilian government, but then they get overthrown, and here's the new general. And this is what this general's about, and here's FELA fighting him. But now that general's gone, and now you have a civilian. It's just like, it'd be too whipshot, and you get confused, and who is this, and what's going on? And so, we really melted it down, so we really just made one of the generals, General Obasanjo, we were like, okay, this is going to be the representative antagonist for this story. And most of what occurs in the book does occur during his reign, but some stuff occurred before his ruling. He was kind of involved in that government as well, so we're like, okay, we feel comfortable with him still being kind of the face of this. And one of the things, if you read the book, we actually do have our author's note where we dive in and we make it clear that we've used composite characters. We give examples of where we've done things to change the strict narrative, but always in the service of not to make it sensational, not to make it cooler or anything like that. It's just, does it make this story flow? Does it make it easier for a reader, especially someone who's new to FELA? Is it easier for them to uncover the truth, the essence of who FELA was, what he was fighting for, and why he's so fascinating and funny and aggravating? And so that ultimately is the real art of it all, is just trying to be like, okay, what pieces do we have to have? Can I move this piece so now it happens earlier than it did in real life, but that now flows much more naturally into this other event? And I think ultimately it's kind of, your mileage may vary a little bit in terms of, I'd like to think that if you were new to the book or new to FELA, that you would be able to read this book and you would be like, this felt really structured, it felt really clear, it was a lot's going on, but I was never confused. And that's great. And then I hope that if you're someone who reads a lot or knows a lot about FELA, you would pick up this book and be like, I know some of this stuff is actually like not exactly accurate, but none of it feels wrong. You know what I mean? And so, but we haven't had anybody come to us yet and say like, oh man, this felt like off. But I'm sure somebody who's a huge FELA head will read and be like, this didn't actually happen this way. And for that particular person, it'll be an issue. But I think for the majority of people, it'll just be like, okay, this was a well-crafted story, and it feels like all of this occurred the way the book laid it out. And again, and the idea of like the truth, the underlying truth of FELA, both JIBOLA and I feel really strongly that this is really representative of who he was, what his music was about, and what he was fighting for.
JIBOLA, anything to add there?
No, I think Conor killed on that answer, so I'll let it be. Yeah.
Okay. I do have another Conor question then. So I'd already asked JIBOLA this, but how much FELA did you listen to while writing your narrative, if any? Like, did it help you jive with it?
Lot. Yeah, for sure, right? It gets you into the vibe. You're hearing his voice, so that's, for me as a writer, like hearing his voice, subliminally in your head is really great. I mean, the music is really good, so I mean, and it's also like, as JIBOLA was saying, like, some of FELA's songs are like 30 minutes, right? And, I mean, I'm sure every writer is different, but I'm one of those ones where if I'm too aware of the lyrics and everything, then, it can pull you out of the state you're in. And if I'm going really well, then the music really is backgrounded. And so something like FELA where it lasts for like 30 minutes and you get this one groove, it really does help you kind of get in, it helps you get into your own groove. As opposed to like, it's a 3-minute pop song, and now there's this other 3-minute pop song with a whole bunch of different hooks. So yeah, I listened to a lot of it. I listened to a lot of like some of his like cool libidos, like stuff he did before he like created his big band, which I really, really liked. But yeah, a lot of times, I throw on one song and then just let the algorithm take me where it did. And usually it kept me with FELA. I would say one thing that was very interesting to me is, I think most people know, you put on a song and, the algorithm takes you all sorts of different places. With FELA, it keeps you with FELA. Like, I think it's like, I don't know, there's nobody else to substitute for this. Like, there's nobody who sounds like him, right? Like, even his sons don't really sound like him. So that is one thing I did notice. I'd look up and I'd be like, oh, wow, that's been like 3 hours of music, and it's all been FELA, and I can't think of another artist that I could just play one song, and it would just be like, yeah, we're just going to play 3 hours of even the Beatles, right? Like, so yeah, it was, maybe that's kind of instructive on how unique he is.
For sure. It's interesting, when we got to the point in the story where you have the unknown soldier, I'm like, well, I should probably listen to this, so I put it on, and similar to you, I'm like, oh, this is 31 minutes? Like, this is going to be a fair bit of my reading time today. Like, it took me back, but it was also very enjoyable, and again, that it was this sustained, period, and you're right, you didn't have another track kind of coming up to kind of ruin the flow, so to speak. Sorry, JIBOLA, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say so. I was just thinking about your previous question, and I remember, well, let me start it this way. One of my favorite movies is Pulp Fiction, right? And one thing I love about Pulp Fiction is how the story is not linear. It's kind of like all over the place, but you're able to still connect it. And if you read this, it sort of reads that way, where sometimes the end is the beginning, and we literally even say that, right? In the first couple of pages, right? When I first started working on the story, I had written about maybe 10 to 15 pages that I was like pretty happy with, and I was like, oh yeah, this is pretty solid. And I was like, hey, Conor, hey, check this out, man. This is what I have. And he didn't say it was bad. It was just kind of like, okay, that's good, but we can refine it. And I thought the story would start that way, but we ended up sort of moving that scene to a later scene, and it just sort of made way more sense there rather than having it kick off that way, because it was going to kick off in a very moody, dark tone and then bring you to the lighter parts of the story later on. But then when we said discussing it, Conor was like, that might be, for people who don't know who FELA is and for people who are new to the story, it might just be way too heavy. Perhaps it might be better for us to bring them in like a FELA song right before it gets heavy, right? So start with something pleasurable and beautiful, and then it gets heavier and more substantive later on.
I'm curious.
Well, and because ultimately, I was just sorry to jump in on Joel's, but ultimately, I think Bella's story is one of it's a love song, right? Like we talk about this, and Bella was famously like, I don't play love songs. Africans don't play love songs. Love songs are empty. But JIBOLA and I both really firmly believe that that's what Bella was playing. He was playing love songs for his people. And so I think looking back at it, when you start a story with like a heavy, dark thing, and you're like, oh, we're going to get to this, you're kind of telling the audience that this is a tragedy. Right? If we've got tragedies and comedies, and FELA's story has tragic elements, but like a Shakespearean sense, it's kind of a comedy in the sense that the heroes prevail. Like the world does get better. The military government's stopped. And you can't say that FELA's single-handedly responsible for that, but it's hard not to believe that somebody who dedicated decades of their life and was arguably the most famous person in Nigerian history, and the fact that that was what he fought for every day, it's hard to think that wasn't a huge part of just the underlying feeling of Nigerians and what they were ready for and why they were ready to finally be able to let's put these military shackles aside and let's go and progress as a people. And so it is a comedy, and it's also funny at times, but I think looking back, I remember that scene. It was really good. It was dark. It was really interesting. But yeah, looking back, I think it would have set the wrong tone, and it would have put you in the mind space that when the story ends, and I don't want to spoil anything, you could look at the ending of this story as, it's kind of sad, right? Like FELA doesn't necessarily go out on top. Who amongst us does, really? And I think that would have just set the wrong context, and we would have maybe felt the ending was more significant and more upsetting than it was really ever meant to be, which was, hey, FELA won because Nigeria won.
That's really, really well put. I'm going to go back to JIBOLA for a moment. I'm curious about because this was a project you wanted to work on. This was a passion project that meant a lot to you. And then at some point you're bringing someone else in. So I'm curious about the feeling of protectionism around the work and about the story when you bring in a collaborator, knowing that, and also the process of discovering, like, maybe I can't write this, maybe I need someone else who can do this. I can do the art and the storytelling visually, but someone else needs to do this other thing. What's that process of kind of opening the doors and letting someone in when it is such an immensely kind of personal work that's connected to where you're from and this amazing figure in the country that you're from?
Right. It's funny, no one's asked me that before, and I haven't visited that feeling in a long time. But just keeping it real, like I think by nature, I'm very I'm self-aware enough to know when I'm not the right person to do something, right? But I can still contribute really meaningfully, right? So I think that if I had written this myself, it would have been fine, right? It wouldn't be, what it is. It would have just been something totally different, And when I started to struggle with the story, because I had all these pockets of things that would happen in the story, but I just didn't have the expertise to connect them together. And my initial plan was, okay, just connect with people who you respect as writers. So I connected with a couple of friends that were going to help, but it just did not work out, right? One of them is Nigerian. One of them, we actually worked on the Dante graphic novel together, and but like because of life, it just didn't work out, right? And when I had reached out to Conor to work on it, and just the energy he brought to it, man, like, I didn't know he was already a FELA head when I'd reached out to him initially. So I was kind of like pleasantly surprised, like, oh, that's kind of already cool, right? And then just like the love and passion and energy and the different perspective he brought into it was amazing. So I think what would have happened if I did it is there would have been some cultural blind spots, because I would just make some assumptions that, oh, everybody knows this thing, right? Oh, everybody agrees with this thing, right? But because Conor is not from Nigeria, people think he's from Nigeria, but, actually, there was a friend of ours that read it. She was like, so is Conor Nigerian? I'm like, yeah, look at his last name. It's not maybe from the eastern part of Nigeria, but, he brought just a totally different perspective. We're able to just catch some of the blind spots. And then we also opened it up just to get other people's perspectives, what is a woman's perspective, a Black woman, a Nigerian woman's perspective on these stories, and that tuned it a bit for us, right? Because it's a very male story, so it was important to just sort of balance it out so that it just feels like, again, the story was we thought it through, and we took this we managed it with care, like FELA as a human being, and not so much just as this cultural icon, but who is the person, right? And Nigeria and West Africa as a living, breathing place, right? And the people in there were not just sidekicks; they were full 360 people as well.
Mm-hmm. I have a weird closing question for you, JIBOLA. I'm curious. There's and no spoilers about when this happens or why, but there's a great kind of 2-page spread of butterflies. I'm curious how long that took and the intricacies of each butterfly.
Oh man. So there was okay, we can't talk about the spoiler, but we had given the book for a couple of people to read, and they felt that the transition from the previous page to the next page was too abrupt, right? So, and we were already, at crunch time. We couldn't come up with a bunch of pages, but we needed something to help us make that transition. And I thought, we can do a montage, but Conor, this was Conor's point. It was like, hey man, like it might feel like we're repeating ourselves, and we talked about it back and forth. And then one moment he was like, "How about it was just butterflies?" And I was like, "No, that's a stupid idea. I don't want butterflies." And then, I went away as I usually do. I was like, "Oh man, a page of butterflies might be actually really cool because we've had this butterfly motif throughout the story." And I was like, you could have fun with all these different butterflies and all these patterns. So I kind of got into it. I was like, dude, we're going to draw the butterflies. I don't think Conor was thinking I was going to draw that many butterflies. But actually,
it's funny. That's actually very similar to like what it actually turned out being. Was very close to what was in my mind. So we got to that point, and JIBOLA was like, we should do this montage, and I was like, no, like it's not going to be the transition we need. And I had been thinking that we hadn't really closed off the story of the butterflies. And then, and it just, it kind of came to me. I was like, oh man, if we had all these butterflies flying through, like it just, for different readers, it's going to symbolize different things, but it's definitely going to be like hope, victory. And really, actually, it's shocking to me when JIBOLA delivered those pages. I was like, that is so close to what was in my brain. Like it was uncanny how we were on almost the exact same wavelength. Once JIBOLA, yet again was like, you know what, Conor, you're right.
Wow. All right. No more compliments for you, buddy.
My therapist said I should be more, self-congratulatory.
Oh man, I don't want to talk about how long it took to draw that page. It was too long.
You turned it around really quickly, though. It was impressive.
Was it? I don't remember. I just remember just like thinking, like spending so much time on it. You know what I mean? Like all the patterns, like.
Oh man, you did it really quickly because that, like the heck of that was like JIBOLA was saying, it was very late. Like we were past when the book was supposed to be locked, and not the production of the book took longer than I think HarperCollins or us thought it was going to. And so there were periods where I think we were slowing down the process, and there was periods where, because again this was their second graphic novel, they were figuring things out. And so when we got to that point, it was like everything was supposed to be locked. And I remember I was just like, well, just draw it, and we're just going to deliver the pages and say we've added 2 pages. And because there's no lettering, there's nothing like that, and we'll just not give them much of an option. And they were so wonderful about it. They were just like, you could tell they were like, what the heck? And then they saw it, and they were just like, oh, yeah, totally get it. And they were just like, yep, we're putting them in there. And it was. I think it's very serendipitous. I think the book is a lot stronger because of those 2 pages. So it's very cool that you picked that out because. Low-key, I think it changed the book having those 2 pages.
100%.
Well, again, thank you so much, guys, for coming on to talk about the book. Because again, it was so fantastic. Again, I'm new to FELA, so I guess I was in some ways your target audience as someone who did not know who this person was and got to learn a lot more about both FELA and Nigeria. So I really appreciate you taking the time to chat about it. And again, it's FELA Music is the Weapon, which is coming out on Tuesday, October the 7th. I think this episode is actually coming out on, I guess, the 4th. So you can pick it up this coming Tuesday. And again, thank you both for taking part in this conversation about the book. It was such a tremendous experience, both to talk to you guys and also to read the book. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And a very, very quick plug, because I know we're running out of time. This is a Toronto show. On the 16th, there's going to be a book launch party. Go to felagraphicnovel.com and you can find out more about the launch party. If you are in Toronto and you want to learn more or get the book signed, come hang out with us. There's going to be food and music.
Very cool.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, but thank you for having us. Take care.
Thanks, Dan.